Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I'd like to very much continue on with the wonderful viewer questions that you so very kindly submitted to this channel a few months back. Well, thank you so much once again for your very kind gesture and for expressing an interest in what it is I might have to say about a particular topic. So thank you so much for that, my dear friends. I very much appreciate it. Truly I do. And that brings us to the next question, or set of questions, I should say, from Oscar Urdaneta. So Oscar, thank you so much for sending me these questions and your comment. I really appreciate it. And you say, "Greetings, Daisuke. I have two questions for your choosing. I'll keep it short and sweet. Number one, favorite Bond 007 and why? Number two, Exorcist 1 or Exorcist 3 and why?" So thank you very much for these very great questions. Number one, favorite Bond and why? I think I'll interpret this to mean favorite person who has portrayed the character of James Bond 007 in the film universe. So I have had the great fortune of being able to speak about the Bond films, the feature films, in the live stream format over the course of, say, over a year on this channel. And just recently we finished the run of discussions. We haven't included the most recent film that is now, as of now, today, in fact, officially released in theaters here in Japan. That film is No Time to Die. I would very much like to maybe speak about that one in a live stream discussion maybe at the end of this month of October, but I will announce that in a separate video. But in any event, so in terms of discussions, we have discussed these, and I've been a huge fan of Bond films since I was a kid. And I was born in 79, and so I grew up in the 80s. And so the films that I saw, or the first Bond that I remember seeing, for instance, on TV when the films would be shown, and also when they would be released as new films subsequent thereafter. So my Bond was Roger Moore. And I remember one of the earliest memories I have of watching a Bond film is watching the film A View to a Kill. And in fact, I remember the precise scene that I remember turning on the TV or something, and it was playing, so I was watching it midway through. And so I started at the scene where they're in the mine, and Zorin and Mayday have discovered that Stacy Sutton and Bond are there, and they're in a type of little map room of sorts, and they've been discovered, and so they have to escape. And it was that scene, and from then on, and I saw that part of the film, and then I was hooked, and I wanted to watch it again, and so I watched it again, A View to a Kill. And then a couple years later, I was so excited when I was able to watch for the first time The Living Daylights, and Timothy Dalton's debut in the role as James Bond 007. So I think for me, I would have to say probably my favorite Bond for me personally is Roger Moore as 007, with Timothy Dalton a very close second. I love their performances. I think Roger Moore has this charm and wit, of course, right? He has this charm and wit, and he is so funny, and he knows when he has to be serious, and the fact also is he has such a funny, witty charm about him in general, naturally, that when he turns serious, you realize that yes, it is a very serious situation if Roger Moore's Bond becomes very serious. So, and the examples from his particular run as James Bond, those films are really brilliant. I said that I watched A View to a Kill when I was young. I also watched on TV when they were broadcast or rebroadcast the films, the cycle of films. I also watched Sean Connery films as well. And Sean Connery was, I love Sean Connery James Bond films. In particular, they were my parents' favorite. But in terms of coinciding with my own, say, trajectory, my own childhood growing up, I grew to love the Roger Moore films and then the Timothy Dalton films, which are, of course, smaller in number than when compared to, say, the Roger Moore film era, but still, the content of those films, I still, to this day, I just remember how thrilled I was as a kid when I was able to watch The Living Daylights for the first time, and that opening sequence with the parachute jumps and the song. And so those two songs in particular, Duran Duran's A View to a Kill and then a-ha's The Living Daylights, those are songs that I still listen to on a fairly regular basis even now. And whenever I feel down and blue, I feel a little bit out of it, I might play those songs and I will perhaps immediately feel better. I will be in better spirits. And there's something really special about those songs and what they conjure up for me, and how I can remember, again, those early memories of watching Bond films. So that's probably how I'd answer that first question, which is a great question, by the way, my friend. Thank you so much for that. And the second question is Exorcist 1 or Exorcist 3, and why? So this is also a very interesting question. I haven't spoken, I think, about the films or The Exorcist or Exorcist 2, The Heretic, or Exorcist 3, or any of the other films with that have the Exorcist name to it. So I can say that I think The Exorcist, the William Friedkin directed film, is a very, very effective work, incredibly effective. And I think for me, as I am getting older and I can maybe become more and more, say, I can begin to probably say that I can see from, say, my perspective as I have children myself now, and so I can see the real eerie horror feel based on, say, the perspective I have now as with my own family, and those unknowns and the fear of what can happen to a loved one, as one's child, for instance, or someone close to you. And that fear and foreboding and not knowing what's going on, that is a very terrifying feeling indeed. And so I think that film, The Exorcist, captures that so effectively and so chillingly. There are other horror-related elements at work in that film, of course, but I think that component in particular has really grown on me as the years have passed. That film is aging so well. It really has this great effect even now. But I remember that, again, going back as when I was a kid. Because when I was a kid, in particular, I was living in the United Kingdom for a certain period of time in the late 80s and early 90s. And The Exorcist, the film The Exorcist, it was impossible for me to find. I couldn't watch The Exorcist, the film. I had heard about it, I had read about it, I had seen pictures in books. I remember the opening of Exorcist 2, The Heretic, with the photo montage, with Richard Burton's narration over it, that version when there are pictures of the first film, The Exorcist, and I remember seeing those. I'm thinking, wow, these are images from The Exorcist, and reading books and seeing pictures there and reading up on The Exorcist. But I was never able to watch the film The Exorcist until, say, we had moved from the United Kingdom to we moved back to the United States at that particular point in time, and I was still still quite young. I wasn't quite teenage years yet, but that was around the time I was able to finally catch up with The Exorcist on, I think, VHS tape. So that was a big deal. But around that time, or maybe a little bit before, I remember The Exorcist 3. And it was, the news was beginning to circulate. There was no internet then back at the time, but it was maybe through horror magazines, Fangoria or something like that. The news started to circulate. There would be a new film called, and at the time it was called Legion, The Exorcist 3. And so I was thinking, oh, wow, this is going to be exciting. Legion, The Exorcist 3. What is this going to be about? And then, lo and behold, one day, quite randomly, I think I remember there was we went to the VHS rental store, wherever it was, and we rented a film. And I loved renting, say, horror films or sci-fi films. And I forget the title of the VHS that we rented, but I remember they had, even back then, trailers, maybe at the beginning, before the film started, or at the very end, after the film, after the closing credits, whatever the case may have been. So you had these trailers for upcoming, say, VHS releases, usually in the horror or sci-fi genre. And I remember one of those trailers that I saw on one of those VHS rentals one day in my childhood life was for, and it was at the time, Legion, The Exorcist 3. And I remember that too because there was a narrator over the trailer, and it said at the end, Legion, The Exorcist 3. Of course, I think since then the title had been changed to, I think, simply The Exorcist 3. However, yes, when I saw that trailer, and it began with the shot of the steps, the Georgetown steps, and it had the fog that was played in reverse, and it had this text about the film The Exorcist, and it said, "Do you dare walk these steps again?" And then it had a kind of recreation of one of the famous scenes, considered a very iconic scene from the first film, The Exorcist. And then it went into some of the footage from The Exorcist 3, including some scenes or some shots that we understand now perhaps weren't in what eventually became the theatrical release of The Exorcist. So there's some shots of the character known perhaps as Patient X, for example. So that trailer was so big, and that was amazing. That was amazing. And so I was waiting for the day to arrive when I could finally watch this film on VHS tape. And it did arrive. I forget, maybe it was a year or so after the fact. I forget exactly, but I remember sometime later it did arrive on VHS tape, The Exorcist 3. One was able to rent it, and so I wanted to rent it immediately. And when I was able to rent it, I watched it. And it was, to my surprise, it was and I say this very positively, a very type of slow burn of a horror film. And it was slow and brooding and creeping. And then suddenly, as you know, it just hits you with these jolts that are so effective. I mean, it has some of the most scariest scenes out there, and they just come out of nowhere. And so that, and then the tone changes, the tone shifts in that film, at least the theatrical release version, are so dramatic, and they're just so sudden. It really has and there's a way also that, there's a particular way that, say, the light seems to shine off the particular metallic object of a weapon that is featured, or one of the weapons that's featured in this particular film. It's really frightening, really very frightening. And so for these and other reasons, I took to The Exorcist 3, the version that I saw, I took that so closely, and it became, therefore, again, with that bent of nostalgia and that look back on my childhood. Again, The Exorcist was a classic, and it was a legendary film. It still is, but it was built up in such a way that I wasn't able to see it because of certain circumstances, as I say, at the time. But I was able to get wind of and watch The Exorcist 3. And so, if I had to choose between the two, it's a hard choice. It's a really hard choice. If I had to go with my nostalgic, say, instinct, I might tend towards The Exorcist 3. Again, it's a very hard choice, but that's not to take anything away from the first film, The Exorcist. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Exorcist 2, The Heretic. Now, as I said before, when I was in England, I was unable to watch The Exorcist, but we were able to rent Exorcist 2, The Heretic. And so I think, based off of the legend that had built up in my mind about The Exorcist, but not being able to see that film, I would be so eager to watch Exorcist 2, The Heretic. And I remember at the time watching that film on VHS, and it was a very interesting viewing experience. Very interesting viewing experience. I wouldn't call it the scariest film I'd ever seen, but there were some scenes that were very effective and scary, and the way that certain jolts of editing occurred, such that it caught you off guard. There's a particular moment say when the Richard Burton character is walking, and there's a scene involving a floor with spikes, which is, I think, very effectively demonstrated in terms of a flying kind of piece of vegetable and the like, involving the character portrayed by James Earl Jones. There's also some really eerie set pieces, especially involving the climax and the battle there. But I think it has this very interesting, almost futuristic tone to it. Exorcist II: The Haircut. Now, I saw a certain version of it that is probably a little bit more truncated than later releases in terms of, especially the ending, how certain character arcs are resolved and the like. And so so Exorcist II: The Heretic, I think, while I wouldn't call it my absolute favorite horror film ever made, I do respect and admire it for a lot of reasons. And so I do want to say just a few words just to say I think it's a film that it's quirky, it's not for everyone. I understand it's also very maybe unintentionally humorous and funny, but there are some really creepy moments. There are some very creepy moments in that film. So there's a particular moment involving the battle over a particular person's heart and soul. I mean, the actual heart and soul, in a sense. So that is, I think, a very eerie and effectively shown piece of sequence. But that's an example. Again, there are some unintentionally funny moments in that, and sometimes might feel quite disjointed. But that's, I think, also part of the overall charm of it. And it does serve maybe in an indirect way as a type of really, I mean, it is very different than, say, Exorcist and then the later film Exorcist III. So anyway, there's my 2 cents on that. But thank you so much, Oscar, for your wonderful set of questions. And how would you answer them? I would very much love to hear what it is you have to say. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.